Join us. Welcome to the program, David Enders. A fantastic book by you there, and I want to ask you, this idea of sectarianism always being posited as the reason, the excuse for the violent acts. Is it really sectarianism when these communities were living cheek by jowl with each other until very recently and quite amicably intermarrying with one another? Why is it that sectarianism is so often put forward as the reason?
Well, I think it's an easy explanation. Just as in the war in Lebanon, sectarianism was often used as sort of a code for power politics. And then there is truth to the idea that in these situations, people do coalesce toward an ethnic group or a sectarian group, or in some cases we've seen a tribal group. But I think what you really have at the root of the problem is the occupation, and you have people who decided to take up a marriage of convenience, if you will, with the occupiers, were often coded as Shiites. And then you had the previous government, which was coded more by the international press in some cases, I think, as Sunni, when you had, you know, Saddam Hussein, who was a leader who did rely on tribal divisions, and in some cases his own tribe, and therefore, because his tribe was Sunni, created what we would think of as a predominantly Sunni government. His main rivals were Shiite political parties, and I think that's the key word. His main rivals were not Shiites. There were a number of Shiites within the Ba'ath Party structure, but the political parties that most strongly opposed him were Shiite political parties. So I think that's where you get these broad notions of sectarianism, and then as you have an increase in violence and people feeling increasingly targeted because of a sectarian affiliation, you have these divides occurring, and you do have people who in some cases actually believe in these differences between one sect. I mean, when I first got here in 2003, Iraqis would point to the fact that people had been intermarrying, lived in mixed neighborhoods, and they would say it's impossible. We'll never fight a civil war. And then eventually you started to hear things like people making statements, all Shiites are bad, all Shiites are with Sistani. And you began to see maybe people who were a lot more reactionary.
David Enders, there has to be a systemic process that brings such things to pass. I mean, on the day of liberation back in April 2003, I'm sure that residents of Baghdad were not thinking along those sectarian lines. Those had to be revitalized, and in fact, what Babak Rahimi was telling us earlier on was that it wasn't until 2005 or even 2006 that kind of dynamic began to emerge. So tell me, what is it that the American occupiers are doing in order to try and stimulate social harmony and to try and bring the communities closer together? Or is it something that they've absolutely refused to get involved with?
Well, it's something that they refused to get involved with for a long time, and I think if you go back to the Coalition Provisional Authority, which was the occupying government led by Paul Bremer, immediately they brought in a confessional system. They appointed 25 seats in Iraq's interim government and apportioned those along sectarian lines, which many Iraqis immediately said was the first major mistake and led to this trend. And then as the violence increased in 2005 and 2006, frequently people would tell us American troops refused to get involved. And if people said, you know, we're being kicked out of our homes because we're affiliated with this sect or another, American soldiers would actually tell them, this isn't our problem, this is an Iraqi problem. Now the American troops are in some cases getting directly involved, trying to bring people back into mixed areas. What we're seeing now is, now that the violence has slowed down and that areas have been essentially ghettofied and walls have been built around them, separating one group or another, in some cases people are trying to go back, and it's a very small number of people And when they're going back, a lot of times what we're finding is that they're being attacked by the same militias. In some cases, especially Sunni militias now, that are being supported and funded and rather deputized by the Americans. And then the other side would say the same thing about the Iraqi military and police, which are often coded as Shiite or arms of Shiite political parties. So now we're seeing at a micro level, in some neighborhoods, American soldiers are becoming the arbiters or the brokers of these returns. When people go back to a neighborhood and then are subsequently attacked, they're turning to the American military for protection. The question is
All right, David Enders, let me just stop you there. This sounds like the archetype, isn't it? Bosnia, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo.
Sure. Well, to a certain extent, I mean, yes. Look, one of the problems of the administration before going into Iraq was that he had little knowledge about Iraqi society, and whatever knowledge he had it from the exiles, the Iraqi political exiles that were somehow trying to woo Washington to do what he wanted to do. Paul Wolfowitz is known to have said right few months before the invasion that, look, it's easy, it's okay for us to go and invade Iraq because unlike the Saudi Arabians, the Iraqis don't have any shrines or sacred spaces in Iraq. And that goes to show the level of ignorance. And unfortunately, because of that ignorance, it kind of led to a number of mistakes in the way in which the Bremer administration or the Bremer government tried to bring some form of security in Iraq.
I see, and tell me something. Have you noticed that is there a difference in the way that the U.S. occupying forces treat an assault on one of their own servicemen and the approach they use in trying to follow that up, and the way that they approach bombings?
Look, I have not dealt and seen this on the field,
Fair
so
enough.
that would be. But can I make a comment on the? Okay, sure.
Let me just go to David Enders, because David Enders is at the sharp end of this. He's been there for 5 years. David Enders, tell me, do they differentiate? Do the American forces differentiate between clearing up an assault, a slaying of one of their own troops, and a civilian?
Well, the American forces have often described their mission as force protection. That is, their number one mission is to make sure nothing happens to any of their troops, which means that Iraqis become second class, or Iraqi lives become worth much less. So certainly I think you can say that the American soldiers deal with attacks on Iraqis much differently. And I mean, part of what engendered so much anger toward the occupation was that in the initial years especially, American troops would shoot first, ask questions later. Any Iraqi was suspect. Any car too close to a convoy was liable to be shot. And so now when American troops come in after an attack, they're often subjected to hostility from Iraqis who have gathered.
So, but to what purpose? I mean, the thing is that regime change was top of the agenda, top of the menu, if you like. That happened. Saddam Hussein was displaced, captured, subsequently executed. But what else is it? What else is on the U.S. agenda if it's not to stabilize this country so that it becomes a bulwark, an ally, a strategic ally in the region?
Well, I think global politics were certainly a reason for the invasion, and I think we've seen that oil was certainly a reason for the invasion throughout. One of the major places the American government has interfered in the political process is when it comes to the passing of an oil law. We've seen considerable pressure on the Iraqi government over the past couple years to pass something that is favorable to international companies, particularly to U.S. companies. We've seen involvement of U.S. companies in the writing, in the language of an oil law. And then you've also seen considerable pressure on the Iraqi government when it comes to the status of forces agreement and building of bases.
We're rapidly running out of time, and what I want to do is I want to get everyone involved. Barak Rahimi, We heard that from the sharp end, the existential experience of living and seeing things as they evolve in Baghdad, a Baghdad bulletin, if you like. What's your analysis? What's reading between those lines? What do you see?
In what sense?
In Iraq, what sort of a regime is emerging?
I think we are seeing a major clash between what some scholars call the centralists. Those are the people, the politicians from both Shia and also Arab Sunni nationalists who want a more centralized government. And then also there are the federalists, people from like Abdul Aziz Hakim and to a certain extent Kurds that want that kind of future for Iraq. And this has been the main problem from the first day when the Iraqi government was formed, and we're seeing it to this day with the provincial election laws that it very much reflected that problem over the Kirkuk issue. So this is really one of the biggest elephants right now sitting in the Iraqi parliament at this stage.
Describe the elephant.
The elephant is really about the future of Iraq, how Iraqis will identify themselves as Iraqis, and to what extent will the government function on the bureaucratic level. Will there be different federate governments based on provincial branches of government? How will it work?
Right.
And I think that debate is unfolding right now in Iraq.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Kevin Martin in Washington, welcome to the program, albeit belatedly. Nice to have you here. May 2003, if I can take your mind back to then, President Bush stands up on a U.S. warship and declares mission accomplished so far as Iraq is concerned. 5 years and more after that statement, do you feel that the mission that the United States set out to accomplish in Iraq has been accomplished? And do you think that the deaths of 47 people today carrying out very peaceable activities is a reflection of success?
I think we were told that there would be no central government in Iraq, that the Shia, the Sunnis, and the Kurds would have to partialize Iraq into 3 different independent states. But we have a central government. Name me a place where we haven't had a bombing. And this week alone, we had one in Turkey. We had them in India. I love how all the time when we run up to that line and cross that line, people want to rub that line out and then draw another one in the sand.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Martin.
And we're not focusing here on the political achievements that have come out of Iraq. It's like they want this mission to fail, so they have to keep redrawing a line again.
Mr. Martin, with respect, it's all well and good to give out plaudits to political achievements, but when people are dying, as they did today, 47 and over 200 people are injured, then one has to take stock of whether those political achievements are worthwhile. And so far as dismembering Iraq is concerned, that was the suggestion of former Secretary of State Baker and United States Senator Biden, fringe players at best in the current state of things.
Every time they step up, they say, okay, well, let's partialize the country in the 3 states. They were wrong. Their plan failed. Okay, there is security in Iraq. Iraq is getting stronger. The Iraqi government under Maliki is getting stronger every day. And it's like every time those who are opposed to this war, every time Iraq makes a success, they want to redraw a line again and say, well, you haven't crossed that line. But you crossed the old line that you set up, and you want to move the goalposts again. It's like having a soccer field and say, okay, we're going to move the goalposts again because you got another goal. And we want you to do over. How many more times are we going to move the soccer goal in Iraq?
The problem, I would respectfully say, is not a matter of moving goals or changing. It's really a matter of the game on the field in Iraq right now. The problem with the recent bombings in Kirkuk shows is that there's a flaw in the logic of an insurgency. I'm sorry, the troop surge. And the flaw basically is that you cannot, at this stage or any stage, you cannot stop the insurgency that is very much embedded in the Iraqi population. And the problem with the surge is that it ignores the main problem of Iraq, which is a political one. And I think this is something that perhaps my colleague is not very much paying attention at this moment.
I see. Now, David Enders.
But where's the Civil War that we were? Where was the Civil War that we were promised? It was degenerating, this and that. Sunnis and Kurds can't get along. Shia can't get along with Sunni. Sunnis can't get along with Kurds. It has not happened.
I would say that they're actually not getting along that much still. The problem is that the problem of creating a national coalition, kind of a national reconciliation, is still in the process of making. And unfortunately, having a U.S. presence there and with the kind of logic that a short-term based logic, you will not achieve that political and national coalition and reconciliation at this stage.
Thank you. David Enders?
Yeah, 1 million dead and 5 million refugees is not a political achievement. That is a civil war. The troop surge presided over the final stages of sectarian cleansing in Baghdad, and the current government that is increasing its power every day looks more and more like the government that we deposed 5 years ago.
But but David Enders...
And this is another individual who wants to move the goalpost again because it doesn't fit your political agenda. It doesn't fit your political wherewithal.
Kevin
okay?
Martin,
it's not a political agenda.
I see. Now, Kevin Enders...
It's not a political agenda. It's a terrible thing that has happened here.
Kevin Enders, just give me a chance to put a question to you here. It may seem simplistic merely to blame the United States for all the ills of Iraq, but does their presence make Iraq more or less secure? That's got to be surely the crux of the matter. And if it makes it less secure, how able is Mr. Maliki's government to request, ever so respectfully, that they leave? Can they do that?
Prime Minister al-Maliki's government would be in serious trouble if the Americans were to pull out tomorrow.
Yeah, but
what needs to happen is that there needs to be negotiations between all of the regional players. I think the lack of engagement of Iran, which is going to be involved in the country, whether we engage it directly or not, as a U.S. government, needs to be addressed. Saudi Arabia's role in the insurgency needs to be addressed. Syria's role in the insurgency needs to be addressed, not by threatening the government there, but by negotiating with it. Turkey's role in what's happening in the north right now, the same situation.
I must stop you, Babak Rahimi, quickly running out of time. 30 seconds if you can, please, sir. Well, tell me, the deadline.
I'm sorry, yes, the deadline.
The deadline is coming up.
I think it's 50-50. At the same time, it could embolden the insurgency to come up again and bring this, some form of destabilize the country. But at the same time, it could actually allow the Iraqi military forces to become less dependent on the American forces there.
Thank you. And Kevin Martin, are the United States forces going to be respectful of the fact that they, at the moment, they have a United Nations mandate? It runs out on December the 31st, 2008, and unless a deal is struck by the 31st of July, then there is actually no basis for them to be there after that date. Are they going to respect that mandate, or are they simply going to say, well...
They're going to respect that...
How? How will they respect that? By remaining?
A deal is going to be struck. We've heard these inflated timelines before. They said there won't be no deal. There's no deal. There's always an 11th hour deal whenever this goes down. Maliki wants to stake his claim. The United States is going to stake theirs, and there will be a deal.
Thank you, sir. And that was Four Corners. Tight as usual. I'd like to thank my guests for shedding light on the dark corners of our debates, and of course you for watching. If you've missed any part of the program or watching it again appeals to you, please visit the website. That's www.presstv.com/programs. And using the by now familiar email address on your screens will ensure we get your correspondence. Four Corners returns tomorrow. Until then, I've been your host, Shahab Mossavat. From me and all the team in Tehran, goodbye.